All right. My clock says 12:01, so I think we could start this session. Malgo, I will give directly the floor to you to start the session. Thanks so much, Malgo.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some of you. Welcome to this event on COVID-19's effects on deforestation and possible responses through strengthening legality and sustainability. My name is Margot Briggs. I'm the Senior Forestry Officer and the REDD+ team leader at FIO. The COVID-19 pandemic has generated a range of additional risks that might result in significant increase of deforestation. These risks include weakened law enforcement, increased illegal activities in forest and protected areas, migration of millions of people, which cause loss of jobs and increased pressures on forests to provide for livelihoods, disruptions in markets and supply chains. These are some of the most direct consequences affecting jobs, income, and food security. Countries' resources and capacities, which were inadequate to halt deforestation and meet the climate goals even before the COVID-19 pandemics, are likely to be further restricted. This means that in order to maintain and enhance climate commitments and submit ambitious NDCs, countries need to consider climate as part of the design of their policy responses to COVID-19 in a way that are transformative and lead to a paradigm shift away from unsustainable development patterns. This should include efforts to halt deforestation, strengthening legality, mobilizing carbon investments, as well as redirecting investments into deforestation-free production and consumption systems. Utilizing all available levers to enable green recovery through integrated climate and forest agendas in financial stimulus packages using some existing frameworks such as, for example, REDD+, will help rebuilding a post-pandemic world. This event, which is hosted by FIO, and it's part of the COVID-19 Forestry Webinar Week, will explore in depth COVID-19 effects on deforestation and possible responses through strengthening legality and sustainability. The event has been prepared by two major FAO forestry programs, the UN REDD program and FAO EU FLECTI program. Warm welcome to all of you, and special welcome to our special guest speaker, COP25 climate champion, Gonzalo Munoz, and our distinguished panelists. With this, I'll pass to my colleague, Serena Fortuna from FIO, who will moderate this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malgo, for those already exciting opening remarks. We do know the importance of this conversation here and all the path that will have to bring the countries forward and the entire world. So, dear participants, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. I welcome you again to the session on addressing deforestation in post-COVID-19 economic recovery. We're going to focus on legality and sustainability. As Malgo was mentioning before, I'm Serena Fortuna. I'm a forestry officer in the REDD+ team here in FAO, and I have the privilege today of being the moderator of this really exciting panel. Before continuing and before entering in the real live of this conversation, I would like to put your attention that this event will partly be in Spanish. So in case you need simultaneous translation, you can use the button at the bottom of the window and immediately switch to the language that you would prefer. At the same time, I really also would like to thank colleagues within FAO. I would like to thank also the panelists and the speakers of this event, but especially some colleagues who have been the heart and the engine behind this event. And in alphabetical order, because everybody's equal, I would like to thank Christine De Value, Maria Cucarava, Nevena Bacalar, and Rosa Bruzzese. We really, really thank them for all the work done before, during, and after the event. And now, yes, it's my great pleasure to start this session with a distinguished guest speaker, Gonzalo Munoz. Gonzalo Munoz was nominated by the Chilean presidency and the United Nations as the high-level climate change for the COP25 to the UNFCCC to mobilize climate action in non-state actors around the world, as well as advise the presidencies of COP25. Prior to this, he co-founded and ran Triciclos, one of the most recognized Latin American companies in the circular economy and recycling arena, with a mission to foster new designs for a world without waste. He's a member also of the National Advisory Committee of Water, Green Hydrogen, and Circular Economy. With this, Gonzalo, in the next 5 minutes, will share with us some views on policy measures to jointly tackle the COVID-19 and climate crisis, two huge crises ongoing at the same time, and why addressing deforestation is key to both. Gonzalo, I pass the floors to you for the next 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Serena, and thank you to FAO for the opportunity to join in such a critical moment for such a fundamental topic. I understand that all of us in this room, hopefully all being well and safe, we all understand that we as humans are not doing well at all in the ways we relate to nature. The IPCC report on 1.5 degrees shows us that if we limit global warming to 1.5 degrees compared to 2 degrees, then the impacts on biodiversity and ecosystems on land, including species loss and extinctions, are still projected to exist, of course, to be lower. But they exist. We keep on affecting our own space in which we can live. Similar would happen to food security, water supply, and economic growth. We're not doing it well. Also, land use practices, for example, are definitely a major source of emissions. Land with its forests is also a key source of sink for greenhouse and helps to increase resilience to the impacts of climate change. So we're seeing both the element of how much we're destroying, but at the same time, how relevant is nature and land use in order to capture and sequester those greenhouse emissions. The main opportunities for this sector to reduce emissions is to stop deforestation, definitely. We have to restore degraded land, of course. We have to adapt land use and much better agriculture practices. We even have to start doing some regenerative agriculture. We have to address food loss and waste. That's absurd. That's even unethical to lose the level of food that we're losing worldwide. And we have to shift demand away from products that result in large emissions. We also know that very well. The main challenges are insufficient fund and lack of integrated policy making and institutional coordination. They are hindering progress in the land use sector. We have to find very rapidly like the business case, the business model in order to move faster and develop all of the fundings that we require to solve these topics. Forests, we know, are an important aspect of land use. Some countries are providing good practices, and we know that, and we should highlight that. For example, Nepal in the late 90s, where 17,000 autonomous community forest user groups were created with rights to manage and control access to forests. National forest cover has increased since then by 20%. Costa Rica, a great example from our region, has also seen forest cover recovering due to payments for government, essentially for ecosystemic services. And that's a kind of let's say, business model that we require in that sense. What we have learned from COVID is that we need to build a climate resilient world. That's fundamental, and that it's all totally related to the way we are integrated to nature. While COVID-19 and climate change are not the same challenge, they do intersect with significant impacts and opportunities. With respect to impacts, COVID-19 has revealed the world's vulnerabilities, many of which intersect with the climate crisis. At the same time, it has highlighted the importance of expertise in science, cooperation, information, and transparency. And let me say again, has highlighted the importance of science, and we should now hopefully start using science and putting science in the center much more than we did in the past or before the COVID crisis, and therefore not only also work on flattening the curve of the pandemic, but also flattening the curve of deforestation, flattening the curve of degradation of land, flattening the curve of the climate crisis. We have the opportunity of following science much more than we were doing in the past. And it has also, COVID, in many cases demonstrated that societies can, when necessarily, pull together to address a global challenge with bold response. So connecting science with the sense of urgency and then acting together, even including the participation of citizens, is a fundamental learn from this process. Recovery also opens an unprecedented window of hope and opportunity. That's, for me, everything that I would like to highlight for this session and every single session. We have a window of opportunity, and hope must be in the center, not only for citizens, but also for nations to shape the 21st economy in ways that can be clean, green, healthy, safe, and just. We have an opportunity. Even not doing it represents such a major risk. So we have to grab the opportunity and move forward for all people, but especially for the most remote and vulnerable parts of the world. Let's do it. Thank you very much.
Gonzalo, thank you so much for those inspiring words and for the call for action. Indeed, if I may, I would also kind of quote something that you mentioned, Gonzalo, last year. Actually, just 1 year from now, June 2019, in one of your intervention pre-COP25, you were giving a very interesting kind of speech in the Araucania region in Chile, exactly on forest also. And you were quoting Joseph Stiglitz that climate change was like the Third World War. Well, now we are actually fighting a double war at the same time. And so the call for action and the need for action is it's kind of double than before now. So your words are very important now. And the action of everybody is very, very key and important. So now I've got the extreme pleasure to present the rest of the panel. The rest of the panel is very exciting. In addition to Gonzalo Munoz, who will exactly rejoin us also as a panelist, we are very lucky and honored to have with us also Edgar Emilio Rodriguez Bastidas from Colombia, Chris Biko, who will make us fly with 0 emissions to Ghana, David Gans from Asia, and then we will close again the panel with Gonzalo Munoz. I will introduce the speakers later in the sake of time, but in the meantime, I would like to mention that yes, in the next 30 minutes or so, we'll kind of hear inspiring words and experiences from local and international reflections and experience. I would like also to ask all the participants who are connected now, and we have a fantastic number of 210 participants so far. So we are very delighted that we could have this interesting number. Please do use the chat box. In the chat box throughout the session, you can include your questions. If the question is specific to one or the other panelists, please indicate the name of the panelist you would like the question to be answered at the end of the session. We're going to have a question and answer session. And also, you might have seen the registration link in the chat box. Please do include your name and contact details. We will use that also to share with you the summary of the session and potential other useful information. Indeed, we'll be capturing the results of this conversation also in the web story that will be presented in the 2 websites, REPLUS and FLECTI websites of FAO. Now, time to go into the interesting panel. We will start with Edgar Emilio Rodriguez Bastidas, who will be speaking in Spanish. So after my short introduction, if you need, please change the language to your preferred language. Edgar Emilio Rodriguez Bastidas is the Director of Forest, Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services at the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia. He's a biologist from the National University with specialization in land use planning from the Polytechnic University of Valencia, Spain. He has previously worked in national park systems at the World Wildlife Fund and at the National Hydrocarbons Agency, the Agencia Nacional de Hidrocarburos. Emilio, I would like to hear a bit from you. What are some of the challenges and needs rural communities are facing in Colombia in the context of COVID-19? We will start with that important question. You'll have 3 minutes more or less to answer, and we are all ear for you.
Gracias, Serena. Gracias a ti y a la FAO por la invitación. Un agradecimiento también aprovecho a los compañeros de FAO en Colombia, que también han estado muy atentos a la posibilidad de poder contar en este espacio la realidad colombiana en relación con el aprovechamiento de los bosques, la situación de los bosques en el contexto de la pandemia. Colombia es un país forestal. Más del 50% de nuestro territorio está cubierto en bosques. Son de más de 60 millones de hectáreas. Obviamente buena parte de ellos se encuentran en la Amazonía colombiana, pero también una buena porción de los bosques se encuentran en la costa pacífica, en bosques de selva húmeda tropical. Pero donde la ubicación de estos bosques también implica unas áreas obviamente que son complejas históricamente en relación con la presencia efectiva del Estado. A su vez también son áreas donde el COVID, la afectación es relativamente aún baja. Colombia todavía está en un proceso de aumento de la curva de acción del COVID, entonces estamos en unos momentos, digamos, aún tempranos, pese a que ya estamos cumpliendo 3 meses de aislamiento, y eso tiene unos efectos, obviamente, en los bosques y en la relación con la comunidad que está asociada a esos bosques. Ya hemos avanzado tenemos identificadas más de 50 iniciativas de forestería comunitaria en estos bosques, las cuales a raíz de la pandemia han tenido que parar. Obviamente ahí tenemos dificultades en cuanto a la posibilidad de brindar asistencia técnica, de continuar con esta asistencia técnica en la que veníamos de tiempo atrás. Efectivamente, el hecho de las dificultades económicas que implica la pandemia deriva en un mayor acceso a los recursos naturales, un mayor acceso al bosque, y obviamente el control o el trabajo coordinado que se había venido avanzando con las comunidades en buena parte, digamos, está en riesgo. Y por otra parte también venimos en un proceso de unas altas tasas de deforestación. En los últimos años hemos logrado disminuir paulatinamente en unas tasas del 10% los índices de deforestación, pero obviamente esta pandemia llega en un momento en el cual todavía no tenemos información específica de qué está pasando con las tasas de deforestación asociadas a la emergencia sanitaria que ha generado el COVID. Por tanto, hay grandes desafíos en este momento, grandes desafíos en volcar una economía en las zonas rurales, en las zonas donde están los bosques y donde estas familias son especialmente vulnerables, a volcar las decisiones del Estado hacia generar beneficios en el muy corto plazo. Pero ¿qué espera la gente? La gente lo que espera es que ese ejercicio que hicimos de volcar una acción orientada hacia el uso sostenible de los bosques que venía de tiempo atrás, no pare. Y ahí hay un reto en cuanto a las posibilidades de asistencia técnica, entre las posibilidades de mantener sobre todo el contacto con nuestros socios, con la gente que está en los bosques y que venía trabajando el aprovechamiento sostenible de los mismos. Mejorar esos flujos de comunicación con ellos, fortalecer ese nivel de confianza, que puedan ver que el Estado, el gobierno y las instituciones siguen con ese interés de trabajar con ellos en el aprovechamiento sostenible en los bosques. En este momento es un reto digamos, de primer orden, y que nos invita a generar nuevas alternativas para mantener el contacto con ellos y para poder mantener al futuro la dinámica que traíamos en los procesos de forestería comunitaria.
Muchísimas gracias, Emilio. The words that you were mentioning now are already kind of bridging towards the second question, that you were starting to mention the importance of sustainable management of forest as one of a measure of recovery also. And that's exactly towards the second question. In your perspective, how can governments best address these needs, the needs that you mentioned so far, and continue to boost efforts to reduce deforestation and greenhouse gas emissions in recovery programs after the COVID? I will give you another 3 minutes to answer, Emilio. Thanks so much for that.
Gracias. En este momento, la política colombiana orientada a la protección de los bosques se basa en 3 pilares específicos. El primero es la legalidad, que el aprovechamiento sostenible de los bosques se desarrolle bajo criterios de legalidad y bajo criterios también de presencia del Estado en territorios donde históricamente ha sido difícil estar, dados los antecedentes, digamos, venimos de un proceso de paz, etcétera. Por tanto, es la presencia en el territorio, en los bosques, la presencia integral es clave. De segunda manera, en el segundo lugar, que esa presencia implique la generación de alternativas productivas y el bosque y el aprovechamiento sostenible del bosque. La forestería comunitaria es la alternativa productiva por excelencia que se está planteando en esos territorios. Y el tercer principio de política es que haya un monitoreo permanente que nos permita evaluar el cambio y la situación, la recuperación de los bosques a través del uso sostenible. Hay otro principio de política que también se está aplicando y que es muy útil en esta coyuntura, y es que esas comunidades que están en los bosques también periódicamente, históricamente han luchado por tener el acceso a la tierra. Justamente ahora, en esta coyuntura, también hemos generado una decisión normativa que nos permite que quienes habitan esos territorios se les pueden otorgar derechos de uso sobre el bosque. Apenas vamos a empezar a implementarlo, es una decisión que se ha tomado hace muy pocas semanas. Encontramos ahí una opción de muy buen recibo que nos va a permitir, incluso en esta coyuntura, a brindarle a la comunidad que está en los bosques la posibilidad de arraigo, de mantenerse en esos territorios, así los temas de propiedad de la tierra no estén muy claros, pero pueden obtener un derecho de uso, un contrato de uso sobre el bosque, y que ellos sean parte de la solución y sean parte de un proceso de protección del bosque a través del uso sostenible. Hay otras herramientas como haber generado un Consejo Nacional de Lucha contra la Deforestación, donde el propio presidente de la República forma parte de ese instrumento, y también estamos generando políticas que nos permitan lograr que a largo plazo, hay que tomar decisiones en este momento, o sea, el uso por sostenible del bosque, la restauración y la recuperación implica una tarea de largo plazo, en donde la restauración y el aprovechamiento sostenible del bosque sean alternativas económicas, eficientes y reales para una comunidad que está ubicada en áreas boscosas donde históricamente han sido sujeto de problemáticas de acceso a la tierra, problemáticas de inseguridad y problemáticas de carencia de presencia del Estado en esos territorios.
Fantástico, Emilio. Muchísimas gracias. And I actually would like to thank Emilio twice, because Emilio is in Colombia and we started at 5 o'clock in the morning for Emilio. I know that in Colombia they start working early, but it's 5 o'clock. So double thanks to you, Emilio, for your participation and reflections. With no further ado, because I'm conscious of the time that's passing by, I would like to give the floor to Chris Biko in Ghana, for his reflections on the next questions. Chris works at the Ghana Forestry Commission and was the national coordinator during the Ghana EU Voluntary Partnership Agreement negotiation phase, as well as a key member of the negotiation team. He's now director of the Timber Validation Department, which is leading Ghana in the development of technical systems for the implementation of the VPA. Thank you so much, Chris, for your participation. I would like to ask, what has been the effect of the COVID-19 crisis on the forestry sector in Ghana? Some reflection from your side. I do also know that you have a slide to accompany your conversation. Chris, the floor is yours for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me on this panel. So going straight to the point, we have had a lockdown, or we had a lockdown over some few weeks. Incidentally, it didn't spread across the country. It was across the 2 major capitals or cities of the country. And however, as it's known, I mean, the country borders were locked. Were locked down, and it's still actually in lockdown. We still haven't opened our borders for commercial flights. And so that the impact is based on this kind of restricted or reduced lockdown in Ghana's case. So that notwithstanding this reduced lockdown, the industry experienced some disruption, significant disruption in business, even though the lockdown was basically affecting the 2 major cities of the country. we had, especially because of the closure of the borders of the country, strict cancellation and suspension of contracts by our importers of our timber, and because again of reduced movement that was induced by the restriction, a reduced concentration of workforce that was induced by the restriction, companies had to run shifts, and this kind of shut up their cost of production. So if you walk into the companies now, you're going to see some stockpiles of export products that were actually meant to have left their mills. You see stockpile of export products. And not surprisingly, the boomerang effect has been the decline in export revenue. So we looked at the first quarter of the year and realized that compared to the previous year, we've seen a drop of 36% in value of what we should have had. The corresponding volume experienced a drop of about 32%. So on the timber industry, that's what we're seeing. Also on the resource development, we see that we had to scale back our plantation development targets, again, because of limited movement of workforce around the country, scale back in the targets. And of course, going forward, this is going to, again, have some boomerang effects. I'll mention lastly that there's also a stalling in forest protection activity, again, because of limited movements that we are experiencing. And that, of course, if you have less protection staff in the forest areas, it creates an opportunity for the recalcitrant people. So illegal logging has been detected in some few places. And there's been also reports which we have to follow up and confirm of some farms springing up where they shouldn't be. So all said and done, these are the effects that we are seeing. But the export-oriented mills, I must say, have been hardest hit by the effects that we are seeing from COVID-19 and its restrictions. The domestic millers, not so much, or the domestic traders, not so much. So, Serena, I would.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think you really hit a very important point here. Although the impact at national level and the lockdown was limited, in reality, that boomerang effect on declining export is creating a larger impact also on the economy. And you started mentioning also an initial kind of visibility, unfortunately, or of increased illegal logging start being kind of noticed. That bridged to the second question, indeed. And we were thinking a bit of learning a bit from you and your ideas on how can commitments to legality and sustainability, for example, those made within the framework of effective EPA, how these commitments can ensure a green post-COVID recovery. We kind of learned of the importance of the post-COVID recovery to be green. How can these commitments on legality and sustainability be ensured?
Yeah, thank you again, Serena. So for the legality assurance system that we have under the earliest arrangement, I mean, it is the right answer for illegality, as we know. And it's interesting to know that it's called a legality assurance system. Because most of the challenges that are springing up have been tested under the LAS or legality assurance system, and seen that if it is well enforced, that is where the solution would be. So let me put it this way: as forests begin, or people begin to tend the forest as an alternate or immediate source of revenue, because of the reduced revenue from other sectors, or actually the shutdown of business activity in other sectors, like the tourism sector, the hospitality industry, for instance, is taking a really, really hard hit. The big hotels in the cities are all suffering, but there's no business going on there. Yeah, so compared to, again, other sectors that have taken the hit, there's a chance, and again, we get reports that people are turning their eyes to, well, back to the rural areas, what is the income or livelihood opportunities there is the forest, the first attention to the forest. So we have challenges that we will have to contend with. And as I mentioned, we are getting stories of illegal farming popping up, and people who took advantage of the reduced staff in the forest areas going to illegal logging. So the first challenge is keeping harvesting levels within the prescribed limits, keeping it legal, maintaining protected areas, and that's a bigger policy issue actually. Maintaining protected areas, because this is kind of looking into the future, focus on the future, that if revenue from taxes from the different sectors of the economy becomes reduced, there's a chance again that the forest will be the one that suffers. That, well, we can make up the loss of revenue probably from the forest, and forest conversion becomes an issue. So again, here the enforcement of a legality advance system is very key in making sure that if you remember, one aspect of legality definition is it must be from a legal source. That becomes something that becomes very relevant to enforce going forward. Let me add probably lastly that the tricky one is the community participation or continued participation or involvement of communities in the policy making process. Now, lockdown situation like this means that there's reduced social interaction, social distancing. What we saw was that many of the forums that were held around had to be suspended, and that has direct implications for how communities and actually all stakeholders are involved in policy making. And if this situation persists, or if we have a repeat of such a situation, you can already see that there's a challenge for multi-stakeholder processes, which is key again in pushing another aspect of transparency, which is key in making sure that governance principles are maintained. So, summary, I think forging ahead of the operationalization of the LAS is key. It's really key in making sure that we see a green post-COVID recovery.
Thank you so much, Chris. And your points are very key. Continuing and actually probably strengthening even more the enforcement of legal assurance systems. But also you were mentioning on the importance of involvement of communities. I had, unfortunately, for the limit of time, we couldn't expand a bit more on that from Ghana side, but we could indeed expand more on this with the next speaker, with David Gans, who will actually provide some reflections on this. David Gans is the Executive Director of Regional Community Forestry Training Center for Asia and the Pacific, RECOFT, where he advocates for community forestry as an entry point and model for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. With support from FAO RECOFT in collaboration with FAO RECOFT is serving 420 forest communities across 7 countries on the impacts of COVID-19. So we are delighted to have also David here and to hear a bit from him on how communities in Asia are being impacted by COVID-19. So this makes a perfect match also with the first reflection that we're hearing from Africa and from Latin America. David, can you provide us your reflections on this specific question on how are communities in Asia being impacted by COVID-19, but also how could their inclusion in the recovery packages build on existing progress to improve the legality and sustainability of forest value chains? So the floor is yours for the next 5-6 minutes, David.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting RECOFT to speak today, and thank you, Chris, for the very nice segue into what I will be speaking about today. It's an honor to be here virtually with you and share some of what we're learning in the Asia-Pacific region and the possible implications of COVID-19 on deforestation and how governments can and should respond. But first, I'd like to give a little bit of context. At RECOF, we're working with thousands of forest communities across the Asia-Pacific region. And we firmly believe in a future where people live equitably and sustainably in and beside healthy, resilient forests. And to ensure this mission, in service of those forest communities, we must ensure that and strengthen both sustainability and legality. It's very, very important. As Serena mentioned, we're also involved with the EU Flag T facility on the survey, but also a new UN RED program called Addressing Forest Crime Through Improved Governance in the Lower Mekong region. And this project will promote the capacities of national institutions to operationalize improved forest governance and sustainable forest management, and support community access to sustainable and legal forest value chains. Very important project that's just starting very shortly. As for the first question on the impact, during the pandemic, RECOF itself was adapting and expanding our work with governments, donors, civil society, the private sector. We want to ensure the response to the pandemic and other threats like climate change respects the rights, views, well-beings, and aspirations of forest communities. We're concerned for well-being, especially during this crisis and certainly after the crisis. And as I mentioned, we're working with the EU Flag T program to document what are the impacts of COVID-19 in 7 countries, including but not limited to the Lower Mekong, where at least 3 countries are moving ahead with the Flag T VPA to bring legality and governance to the forefront. Our collaboration with the FAO EU Flag T program includes a review of the support mechanisms for forest communities and researching how communities are effectively responding with or without formal support. And legality and sustainability are certainly embedded in the nature of this research for the region, but we'll be sharing the instrument with other regions so that they can also benefit from the survey mechanism. So far, there's some anecdotal evidence of trends, and Chris already alluded to some of this. Governments with strong forest governance and enforcement are claiming a decrease in forest crimes due to the lockdown measures and checkpoints, certainly between provinces or states, limiting the movement of people, but also limiting the movement of goods and services. Countries with weaker forest governance are of greater concern. That's where we're seeing increases in forest fires, illegal logging, illegal land grabbing, and certainly land use conflicts throughout the region. And some countries are trying to fast track public consultations. Chris also mentioned the problem of trying to hold consultations at this time, but we are very concerned that in certain places of the world, there's little resistance from communities and civil society because they're so distracted by the pandemic, and this is very troubling. So we want to make sure that these public consultations are either delayed to a time period when civil society and communities can effectively take part in policy decisions. Lastly, forest certification is advancing, but too slowly in our view to address the needs of smallholders in these supply chains. So FSC, Regional Forest Stewardship Standard for smallholders in this region, that consultation has been extended, which we're obviously understanding why it is. PEFC has a similar process, and COVID-19 is presumed to be the slowing down of these consultation processes. For the second question, how do we include forest communities in recovery packages in ways that improve the legality and sustainability of forest value chains? We have to ensure the legality and sustainability of forest value chains. It's an essential component of any recovery strategy, not only for forest communities that we serve in this community, but for all of society. And I believe that the first step is to organize and provide concrete recommendations, which we've heard some today. I'll give a few more in a minute. And I'm glad to see FAO is doing that this week. We're fortunate that FAO's webinars this month have brought together governments, forest and farm producers from around the world to share ideas, to build alliances. Together, we can represent not only those that are most affected by climate change and this pandemic, but those who are developing innovative responses and ideas, and we can share those innovative responses. Next, we need to build relationships, capacities, and systems. We have to understand, respond, and adapt to these new threats and changing circumstances. And secondly, we need to reduce the spread of the risks, preempt the shocks, and even create new opportunities, especially to support community access to sustainable and legal forest value chains. Our experience in the Asia-Pacific region has shown us that the existence of broad-based, inclusive, well-organized, and well-connected local institutions is the first and most fundamental requirement for building the resilience of these forests to cope with the pandemic and emerging challenges. So I'm going to move now to the picture, which is very complex on the impacts that are occurring across a range of issues. We've heard some of them today: health, mobility, sustainability of landscapes, farming systems, access to inputs and markets, even the physical security of women in households and communities, to name just a few of the threats. And we have to understand and face these challenges head on. We need to share these with each other, with governments, with investors, with value chain actors, and with our returning youth, and adapt these solutions to our own context, value chains, production systems, and policy settings. If we're going to build back better, and please, could you turn on the slide, please? Some about building back better systems and connections, which we are working well, but have since broken down. Others are new, innovative ideas. So we need diversification from production to processing and transportation and service provisions, from farm production to landscape production of a whole goods and services kind of approach, not just a one health approach, but a one landscape production approach, and diversifying the buyers and branding of products and services from forest communities. So looking beyond diversification, we need to build the capacity of forest communities to sustainably produce value-added timber, such as deforestation-free timber. And we have to look at certification systems as well through the timber legality assurance systems of the FLEGT TVPA. These are 9 steps that I would like to emphasize for building back better. I'm sorry, I'll go through them very quickly.
David, I think we need to very quickly pass to the next question to Gonzalo,
right.
if possible.
Okay.
Otherwise,
so
yeah, please conclude.
These 9 building blocks are essential. We have to build back better. And we have the opportunity to address the most persistent and neglected inequalities in the world by using these 9 steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. And sorry for my intervention. Unfortunately,
No.
considering all of this important topic in 1 hour, 55 minutes actually is very, very complex. So with no further ado, I would like to ask one more point of reflection from Gonzalo, so to have at least a few minutes to answer 1 or 2 questions. Gonzalo, moving from COP25 to COP26 and acknowledging the important role of nature-based solutions, the forest in particular, you already mentioned that. How do you see countries moving forward to better integrate forests into their NDCs for a green recovery, into the nationally determined contributions of the countries? Gonzalo, I'll give you the floor for 3 minutes if possible, and then we'll go to question and answers. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Serena. And I think that my co-panelists have been very clear on setting very realistically, the situation that we're living around COVID. This was the year when we still expect countries to enhance their NDCs. It's getting hard, and it was very well mentioned initially by Edgar that we still haven't seen all of the effects of COVID in many regions. So let's be realistic on that sense, knowing that, of course, we know the role of nature-based solutions in forests and land use in terms of the role of the Paris Agreement and therefore the commitments of the parties. We expect, of course, that the process will allow us to have not only Article 6, but also another very concrete mechanisms in which we can allow countries to have ecosystemical services to develop their capacities of conservation and restoration. But I think it was very well also mentioned by Chris and David. The element of sustainability and legality must work together. That is fundamental. What we are doing is using the knowledge in terms of knowing that 89% of all countries refer to agriculture and or land use change and forestry when outlining the mitigation contribution to NDCs. 98 of the countries include priority areas for adaptation actions, mention land use sectors in their NDCs. We expect that to be properly included, not only through the role of the countries, but when it comes to the role of the non-state actors, that it's part of the mandate of the champions, we expect also municipalities and business sector to contribute within their own concrete actions towards the enhancement of the NDCs. On a national level, we have seen some of these being reflected, for example, through Pakistan, that's working on tree reforestation efforts, understanding that creates jobs and enlarged forest and pandemic in pandemic times. So we can, as David just mentioned, we have several opportunities there that we have to use. But let me also explain that there are countries like Chile, for example, that are actually positioning their forest. I mean, they are enhancing their NDCs. Chile just enhanced their our NDC some weeks ago. And in that enhanced NDC, we have positioned forests with 3 unconditional goals: 200,000 hectares of native forests in sustainable management and recovery by 2030, another 200,000 hectares to be forested, and also a goal specific on reduced degradation. We have some specific goals in peatlands as well, but also I wanted to mention that all of this can and must, as is in the example of Chile, include just transition as part of the elements, and therefore also mentioning some of the aspects that David very properly mentioned. So there is an opportunity. We're facing very challenging times. We have to be realistic, but we have to allow the ecosystem to work towards the incorporation of forests and land use in the enhancing of the NDC, hopefully most of them being enhanced this year.
Gonzalo, muchísimas gracias también por el tiempo, haberte mantenido en los minutos disponibles. That, again, with no further ado, I think it was fantastic reflections, and I think we do have time for question and answers, and we would love to actually, unfortunately, we received various questions that we will kind of capture and reflect through probably the web story that we will publish in the next week and days to come. We maybe can focus on 2 questions. One is for Chris, and if time also allows, I would like to also ask one question for Emilio. So just to giving a heads up for the 2 panelists to get ready, and also to please answer in 1 minute maximum, let's say. So for Chris, one of the participants asked if that you have indicated a significant decline in the value and volume of exports during the first quarter of 2020, of course, as a boomerang effect of the COVID, as you mentioned. Being part of the global supply chain, when do you expect a recovery, if that is possible to kind of predict somehow? Or if the recovery gets delayed, what do you expect in terms of production and management? A couple of minutes for you to answer, Chris.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm unmuted. Yeah. So when do we expect the recovery? Now, that's a pretty difficult question to answer, because it's going to depend, as I said, for the exporters. The mills that produce for the export market, that's going to be really dependent on when the international Western, Eastern markets start moving again. So we can only relate our recovery and our back to normal, if we ever do, to when the West and our markets also start return to normal. I think they are beginning to do that. But it's a difficult one to really get deep into. But if it continues like this, I would suspect, as I spoke to just this morning, one of the main mills in Ghana, that they are beginning to depend on overdrafts from the bank to pay workers, to pay their workers. Thankfully, we haven't had any reports or account story, if you like, from any the mills beginning to lay off workers. But in paying workers from overdrafts from banks, for instance, is not something that can be sustainable. So one of the immediate things would be, some social issues of people having to be laid off. But also on the resource itself, there has to be innovative ways of maybe directing the mills to start looking at the domestic market. If the domestic market can begin to absorb all that goes to the foreign markets. Otherwise, we're going to be at the mercy of, again, illegal loggers in the forest. So that's what I can say for the prolonged effect of the impact of the COVID-19. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Unfortunately, I was reminded that in reality, we don't have 1 hour, we have 55 minutes. So although we wanted to put also the next question to Emilio, I think we'll have to answer to all the questions that we received through the web story. So we'll then be in touch with the panelists to kind of formulate answers and answer through the web story. I would like then to thank all the participants and the panelists once again. I really hope to meet you soon in person, and hopefully at COFO, World Forestry Congress next year, and especially that remembering that this pandemic is not just an enormous kind of challenge, but also an opportunity, as it was mentioned by all the participants. I don't want to use more time because I want to give the floor to my colleague Daphne Hewitt, who will give some concluding remarks and kind of closure of this very nice session. Daphne is a senior forestry officer and the FAO EU FLECT Program Office Manager here in FAO. She's a forester with over 20 years of experience in sustainable forest management, forest certification and governance. Daphne, I would like to pass you the floor for the next couple of minutes before we have to unfortunately close this session. Thank you, Daphne. And again, thanks to all the panelists. Daphne, you are muted. Please remove your mute.
Can you hear me now? Thank you very much. And I've been very much enjoying this discussion, and thank you for the opportunity to make the closing remarks. I'm sorry there was not time for more questions, because I think that the panelists have, and the opening, the overall discussion have really brought out some common themes that we're seeing really being important priorities. Strengthening the governance and the trust between governments and communities was a very important element that was highlighted in the example of Colombia. And I think from Asia, from the community forestry perspective, this is something we'll be seeing as a very important element going forward. And as we have heard from governments and civil society and climate change activists and climate change champions, we have very common tools, common strengths that we can work on going forward. And I think that stronger forest governance, as has already started to be implemented in the VPAs, and has really been a strong element in increasing legality and systems that have been developed as a result of that, plus the identification of NDCs and national strategies for addressing climate change are really key springboards for moving forward and addressing these economic issues and building back green. As our guest speaker mentioned at the very beginning, this is an opportunity to capture the actual impacts and to build on what we have seen that works, and the tools and the experience of countries and regions where this has already been put into place and piloted and tested for many years. And I think that we have some excellent examples in the panelists around us. I think one of the links is also the use of science. I liked this mentioned at the very beginning. Now is our opportunity to use data, to use experience, to use our findings from the surveys that Rekoff is leading, from the experiences of VP implementation, from the development of NDCs and national climate change strategies, and the experience of multi-stakeholder participation. If we use the data and can combine as a community to build back better using concrete findings and science, that is an excellent way of grabbing some of these opportunities that we're seeing. I can't address all of the points that were made, but I think that on closing right now, I want to thank everyone for their excellent interventions and experience. We've heard from Ghana, from Asia, from Latin America, from government, from communities, and also from climate change champions. And I want to highlight how important those different perspectives are. Just going back that slide one more time, sorry. Thank you, David, for mentioning as well that these webinars go on for this week, actually through tomorrow, the FAO webinars, and they are a really good opportunity for us to hear and capture perspectives, and also to use these excellent remote platforms that we've all discovered recently to reach a wider audience and share experiences. I highlighted here that FAO is continuing some efforts in July, September, and October. This will be distributed to participants and available on our website. We expect to have our COFO event in October, and discussions and output from this session, as other sessions during the week, will feed into recommendations, and our recommendations on how to help our member countries and all of our stakeholders to look at forest sector and include forestry in the economic recoveries, include forestry in social recovery and environmental green building going forwards. And that continues to be our commitment as FAO through our various tools. Thank you very much, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you all in person very soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Chris and Emilio.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. The next session.
Ben, I'm just testing my audio. Can you hear okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Super,
Yeah.
thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. Yes. By the way, Marco, how do we know when the session is actually starting?
I think it's up to us. It's 1 o'clock. I think we can start.
Okay, great. Then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining this session today. This is the session on how forest and landscape restoration can build resilient, sustainable business in a COVID world and a post-COVID world, hopefully, that we will be in very, very shortly. To take us through this session over the next 55 minutes, we have with us 6 speakers. Marco Boscolo, who is our Senior Forestry Officer here in FAO with the Forest Governance and Economics. Great to have you with us, Marco. We Benjamin Coelho as well, also with our with the FAO Forestry Department here in FAO. He's the Forestry Officer for Planted Forests in the Forest Management team. We've got Jonathan Geschens, who is the Ecosystem Services and Sustainable Land Use Program Lead with the UNEP Finance Initiative. John, great to have you with us. Thank you. We have Thomas Gishuru, who is the Business Management and Development Lead with the Tree Growers Association of Nyandarua in Kenya. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us. Carol Saint Laurent is the Deputy Director of the IUCN Forest Program and coordinates the Global Partnership on Forest Landscape Restoration. Great to have you with us so early in the morning for you, Carol, there. And finally, Christophe Bessier. And Christophe is our Senior Forestry Officer here in FAO for the Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative. And Christophe also has the status of Forestry Engineer with the Department of Forestry, Les Eaux et Forêts, with the Ministry of Agriculture in France. Thanks, Christophe, for joining us. Just before we move on to the opening, and I'll hand it over to Tim in just a moment, just a few words on process. Anyone who's been following these seminars, these webinars this week will know we only have 55 minutes. It's a very short period of time. And we'd like to allow time at the end for questions and answers. So please hang on to those and hold your questions to the end if you can. Use the question and answer function that you'll see at the bottom of the screen to provide any questions, and we'll be following that and moderating that as we go along. Of course, you'll have a chance to actually ask your questions or make comments at the end as well. We have 2 segments. First of all, we're going to be examining the practical tools to link restoration to business development, and then subsequently we're going to be hearing about how we apply those tools in real practice on the ground. I would urge participants to use the chat function if there's any problems that you see during the session. And finally, as I mentioned, as we're on a very strict deadline here for the hour, we'll try to move these sessions along as quickly as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, please use the Q&A function that you have available to you. Before we get on to the presentations, I'm very pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Tim Christofferson, who leads the Nature for Climate branch in UNEP with UNEP's Ecosystem Division. For introductory remarks and to open the session, Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tom, and hi, everyone. Indeed, this is a timely webinar, Building Back Better After COVID. So let's first remember that going back to normal is not good enough. Even before COVID-19, the world was also in a crisis. We have the climate crisis to deal with. Increasingly, we are worried about the biodiversity crisis, but also 800 million people were malnourished, or even over 800 million. The figure was going up for the first time in decades. And these trends will now get worse with COVID. So we must build back better. Just going back to normal is not good enough. We can learn from the 2008 financial crisis. However, at that time, greenhouse gas emissions in 2009 increased threefold compared to the average increases in the years before. So in this crisis today, we have to do better also on our greenhouse gas emissions. And what topic is better for both removing and avoiding emissions, for creating green jobs, for ensuring progress towards the SDGs, and forests. So my second main point in the opening is that nature plays a key role in building back better. Together with our colleagues at the International Labour Organization's Green Jobs Program, we estimate that there's a potential for 15 to 60 million new green jobs in the coming months and years if we are smart and build back better, including nature-based solutions. One of the biggest nature-based solutions is ecosystem restoration, and we're lucky that the UN General Assembly last year agreed to make 2021 to 2030 the UN decade on ecosystem restoration that FAO and UNEP together lead, and we're very pleased that we will launch our final strategy for the decade, which has received 2,000 comments from many of you out there by 15th September. Restoring a significant part of the world's lost or degraded ecosystem would take about 0.01% of global GDP between now and 2030. That is very little, but it does add up to about $1 trillion in investments that we have to mobilize, both public and private. But the good news here is that for every dollar invested in ecosystem restoration, societies on average get $9 back in ecosystem services, often benefiting the rural poor most. So with this brief opening, I'll hand it back over to you, Tom, and look forward to discussions.
Thanks so much, Tim, and absolutely, this is a critical moment, both for the work we've been doing already for many years, but certainly it is compounded dramatically by the situation that we're in right now. Thanks for that. So without further delay, I'm going to hand the floor over to Marco Boscolo to introduce us to the tools that we're using to build back better in economic development, in forest restoration, starting off with the work we're doing in FAO on this. Marco, over to you. Marco, go ahead and share your screen if you can.
Yes, thank you.
There we go.
Is it there? Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Thomas. Well, the next three presentations will introduce some tools, as you just mentioned. They were developed to help producer organizations and SMEs to mobilize finance for forestry and restoration activities, also from private sources. And this first tool I'm going to present is about a new guide that is being finalized called Turning Forest Restoration into a Sustainable Business. It is a collaborative product of my team, together also with Petri Lettonen, Alex Pra, and various colleagues of FAO. So let me just say a couple of words about why we developed this tool. We developed because just as Tim said, forestry and restoration present multiple opportunities for rural development and to build back better following the COVID emergencies. Opportunities that are good both socially in terms of job creation, to strengthen the health of communities, or as we heard in some of the sessions yesterday, they're good environmentally for climate resilience and mitigation, for biodiversity conservation, and are also good economically. They can help raise incomes, create value. They make many times economic sense. And the question is, if this potential is so great, why is this potential not more fully realized? And one of the reasons we encounter is because of limited access to finance. Why is there this lack of finance? After all, you know, when we speak with multiple financing sources, whether they be banks, impact funds, development finance institutions, what we hear is that engaging with the small producers, their associations is often part of their missions, part of their do it, and indeed they are interested in doing this, but they find this engagement difficult because sometimes the business idea is not clear. Without a clear earning logic, it is not clear how the business can be scaled up, and the requests for finance come with insufficient information. So that is why we have developed this guide to help producer organizations and SMEs flesh out their ideas and turn them into sustainable businesses. This guide is a roadmap that begins with a business idea and walking project developers through 10 modules, help them turn them into bankable business plan. To clarify, for example, what are the potential economic returns, the costs, the cash flow, the investment needs to do it. This is in a module on financial analysis. To clarify the level of production that is possible, and also the level of production that would turn the business into profitable. To clarify the anticipated social and environmental impacts in the module on ESG criteria. To clarify the risks inherent with the business, whether they be technical, environmental, economic and market, or social risks in the risk assessment module. To clarify the skills, the commitment, the management competencies that are needed to run this business. To clarify the market and how the business will fare compared to competition. And finally, to clarify the legal requirements as well as the technology and infrastructure that is needed. So in this guide, each modules contain a number of ready-to-use templates, tips, real-world examples, and advice. And we developed this guide with the aim to build on the momentum around restoration activities and link them to the provision of tangible benefits for rural populations so that they will have a long-term interest in the success of this restoration. This guide is intended for producer organizations and SMEs that have already some level of business, however small. They have access to a market. They want to scale up operations, increase value additions and returns to their members, and that in order to do that, they need some access to additional finance. Now, we understand that in some contexts, the range of businesses can be limited to because, for example, we are operating in dryland areas where these opportunities may be reduced. However, even in this context, it is worth looking at possible business opportunities that can help reduce restoration dependence on public finance alone. So I think with this, I used my 5 minutes, and you will hear later in the seminar Thomas talk about how they have used this guide in the Tree Grower Association of Yandal. Thank you very much. Back to you, Tom.
Marco, thanks so much for introducing that for us. That was excellent. And I just, one of the key areas, obviously, is how we lift the level of the game amongst these smallholders. And I'm going to hand it over to Ben Caldwell now to walk us through that and how we help to professionalize this process among smallholder landowners. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Ben Caldwell, and as Tom has said, I'm the Planted Forest Officer here at FAO. I had the pleasure to work with Marco Boscolo and also with Thomas, who you'll hear from later today, on a business case around planted forest in Kenya. And I'll be talking a little bit today in these 5 minutes I have on what we did and how we did it. Particularly, we developed a set of tools and an approach for smallholder-led inventory of trees on farms. So this is a tool to help smallholder farmers who have trees on their land to develop information that allows them to increase the economic, environmental, and social returns that they can expect from their trees. This is important for COVID-19 because trees on farms are a resilient reserve of capital, and they have untapped potential because small farmers are not managing, negotiating, and doing business at the scale that they could be, at a scale that's cost effective. Small farmers are perhaps one of the world's largest economic sectors, and they collectively manage more than half of the world's arable land, per a report by the IUCN in 2018. So this is not something small. This is a big deal. By supporting small farmers to professionalize their businesses, we can make a major contribution to improving economic resilience and restoring and maintaining the productivity of land, and make major contributions to the UN decades on family farming, ecosystem restoration, action on the SDGs, and the response to the environmental crisis caused by COVID-19. 3 steps that we've identified that are critical in developing the business of farm forestry for associations of smallholders. We want to develop the farm forestry business idea. We develop an inventory and information base to inform business planning and management, and then develop and implement a data-driven business plan, which Marco Bosco has already talked about in the preceding presentation. So to me falls the second step, which is to discuss the process of producer-led inventory. So this is association managed and farmer led. What does that mean? We have a project called the Forest and Farm Association here in FAO. And they work to organize farmers, particularly smallholder farmers, in associations that can then organize production, negotiate prices, and access technical assistance in a way that's impossible at a small scale. So this inventory is managed by this farmers association, but it's led by the individual farmers who are involved in it. They take the inventory of the trees that are on their farms themselves. What's the advantage? The advantage is that a locally developed and owned product makes it more likely to be sustainable and useful for business planning. So we use simple tools that are tailored to local conditions. And our premise is that information should be good enough to inform business planning, but doesn't need to be perfect or comprehensive at the beginning. So to begin, we advise producers, associations, and farmers to only collect tree diameter sizes and basic contact information rather than the full suite of measurements you might see in a national forest inventory, which can include height, species, and very precise measurements of forests. We advocate using locally available tools, for instance, tailor's tapes, which are readily available in local stores. And if farmers don't have smartphones, we use paper-based solutions and data sheets with manual data entry, because this allows it, again, to be owned by the farmers in the association. And at the association level, we rely on common tools like Excel, open source tools like Open Forest that are maintained by FAO and other partners in that suite of tools that are easily available in the Office of the Farmers Association. The idea is that the Farmers Association management is trained, and they in turn mobilize and train their farmer members and provide aggregation and quality control. Incremental improvement led by the association allows the business to make money from the business of growing trees, expand that tree base, and maintain and adapt it for themselves, making it economically sustainable as well. So you'll hear more about this from Thomas, who's already been mentioned by Marco, and I hope this sparks some more interest on this. These are available by correspondence with Marco and I, or you can hear more about it from Thomas. So thank you, and I hand it back over to you, Tom, at the end of the time allowed to me.
And thanks so much for that. And definitely this is an issue that is gaining a lot more momentum. I know our colleagues in UNEP, and we'll hear from Jonathan in just a moment on the work they've been doing in the UNEP Finance Initiative on this and helping to support this process and the work they've been doing for many years on that. Just colleagues, just quickly, and this is primarily for our panelists, please have a look at the question and answer boxes at the bottom of your screen. We do have a number of questions, and Marco in particular, if you could share the link to the guidelines that you mentioned in your presentation, that would be very, very useful. We'll come back to these questions, of course, at the end. I'd like to hand it over to my friend and colleague Jonathan at UNEP Finance Initiative to tell us a little bit about what they are doing to help support this finance environment for smallholders. Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Can you hear me well?
Perfectly, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Thomas said, my name is Jonathan Gessens. I coordinate the Sustainable Land Use Activity Portfolio at UNEP Finance Initiative. For those of you who don't know, UNEP Finance Initiative is a collaboration between UNEP and more than 300 financial institutions interested in being more sustainable in the future. I'm very grateful to the FAO colleagues for giving me this opportunity to give you a sneak peek of one of our most exciting projects on the finance side of the Restoration Initiative, which is this mentoring platform. So, the concept for the mentoring platform came from the realization that for many restoration projects, what they are is really essentially social, environmental, and economic experiments that are inherently risky and built on relatively untested assumptions, especially around their economic viability. According to the principle that the more assumptions one can validate to create a robust business model, the greater the chances of attracting significant investments. It becomes therefore essential to have a system that can rapidly, factually, and cost-effectively test each key assumption and determine its validity for the restoration initiative. But this is hard, in part because each project has its own set of assumptions, characteristics, and attributes that need to be analyzed carefully and within the context of the local situation. But also because validating and testing assumptions, it's a real craft that demands care and also experience. So the solution to this problem that we come up with is to mobilize a network of private sector experts willing to provide bespoke advice to each project at each stage of their development and to help them reach bankability quicker with increased access to finance as a result. So essentially, the platform takes the form of a coaching marketplace of sorts. On the one hand, each restoration project team will have the opportunity to describe their situation and where they are in the process of validating their core assumptions, those assumptions that underpin their initiatives. And on the other side, we're going to bring together a network of business practitioners with a diverse set of skills to provide bespoke coaching on how to design, test, to validate assumptions, on coaching to how to prepare and create a value proposition, on how to produce a solid business model, on contracting, on marketing, amongst other aspects. And to attract those experts, the platform intends to capitalize on the unmet desire by a growing portion of the private sector to have greater social and environmental impacts and to participate in projects contributing to the SDGs. Projects are not going to limit themselves to outside consultants, but are also intended to tap into existing knowledge from people already working in those fields, including colleagues from FAO and UNEP or IUCN. The platform is still under development, and we will welcome its first batch of applicants in the fall. Going forward, the ambition is to make the platform and its growing network of experts available to a wider and more diverse group of projects across a variety of geographies and across a variety of environmental and social objectives. People are invited to contact us to know more about the initiative, the platform, and what it can do for their own activities. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much. Back to you, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Jonathan, for that, and for highlighting just how important context is in this process and understanding that the different situations we deal with in different countries, different communities, creates a situation where we really have to tailor our approaches to those contexts. Thanks for underlining that, underscoring that for us. Colleagues, as we move into the next round of 3 presentations, again, we're going to move through this. Please hold your questions until the end or put them in the question and answer box. Our panelists, of course, are following that as well, and we'll come to those at the end. There is also, if you look at the chat function, there is a link in there to register for anyone who hasn't registered yet. Please have a look at that and do register if you can. There's also a link in there where you will be able to receive, if you wish, copies of all of the presentations that are being presented today. With that, we'll move to Thomas Gishuru from Kenya. Thomas is very much on the front lines of this and is dealing with these issues of context on a daily basis. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, participants. As you have heard, my name is Thomas. I'm the Business Development Manager for Nyandarua. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to present to you how we have used the tools that have been presented by Benjamin and Marco in terms of developing a business for our association. And just a quick one is that Nyandarua Tree Growers Association is just an association of tree growers from one of the counties in Nyandarua, which has approximately 3,000 members. And we are trying to see how we can combine both restoration approaches and a business case so that we can be able to support the livelihoods of our members. As far as the tools are concerned, we started off by taking stock and determining our annual increment. This was very important because for a long time, the farmers had been operating on an individual basis without actually knowing what they can be able to obtain if they conduct their business collectively. So there has been a lot of challenges because of exploitation at that individual level. So we started off by thinking how we can conduct an inventory and take stock of what is currently available in view of the priority products that the farmers would like to take to the market. With this, we were equipped with very good information that we were able to develop a business plan. And this is how now we were able to see what business case can we put forward and look for partnership that we can be able to exploit so that we can now be able to improve the livelihoods of our farmers. But now, in terms of forest and landscape restoration, we have also realized that this is not only about money. We have to make it more than money. And this is how we are striving to achieve an ecosystem balance in line with our business. And this includes, apart from growing trees or dealing with the trees that are commercially exploited by our farmers, we also try to see how best can our tree growing as a business also contribute to other ecosystem services like catchment and riparian land restoration, soil amelioration, and all other services that can be obtained through tree growing. And by tree growing, I mean our focus is mainly based on farm forestry. We are only dealing with farmers that are growing trees on their farm because, again, there is the forest aspect for the forest areas that are managed by the government or what we call the state-owned forest. For our case, we are only dealing with the farmers that are growing trees on their farms on smallholders basis. And this is important because it's not only the tree growing as it's not only that they're growing trees, it's a mix of other activities that they are doing on their agricultural land. So trying to see how best they can exploit tree growing as a commercial value chain alongside other activities that they are doing on their farm. With that, we are now again exploring the partnership through what we call the public-private partnership, so that we can be able to actualize our business case and also actualize our forest restoration efforts towards now what we call or what we want to realize in terms of building back better, especially after all the disruptions and the challenges that are being brought about by the COVID-19. With this, we are mainly looking at three main categories of contributions as far as our work is concerned. And one is the issue of climate change. How is our doing business as far as is concerned also contributing to the issue of climate change? And this is by ensuring that there is reduced pressure from the existing forest, from the existing government forest. By having trees on the farm, the pressure that is being exerted, especially through what we call the reverse migration, people migrating from towns to coming back to rural areas, there is that increased pressure. But if some of the services and goods that are obtained from the forest can be obtained on farm, then that pressure that is reduced can contribute quite a lot in terms of ensuring that climate change is addressed. Then afforestation programs, as I said,
Thomas, if you could speak a little bit closer to the microphone, please.
Okay. Then the other issue is on the issue of afforestation. Afforestation in the sense that apart from exploiting what is actually available now, as I said, we took stock, but now we also want to ensure that we have an annual increment in terms of afforestation and planting more trees, so that we can be able to put more area at the trees. And then, of course, the third component is on the issue of income, which is also very important to us, because income, what we want to also increase is the income at the household level, at that farmers growers level, so that it can act as an incentive to the farmers and also ensure that they are motivated to continue the tree growing. Addressing these three components, we are sure that we can be able now to be able to contribute. Of course, there are some constraints to this, and the biggest one that we are trying to be cognizant of is the issue of there is a risk of creating large-scale monoculture plantations, which we have to really capacity build our people, because again, when we talk of forest and landscape restoration, it's not about monocultures or the priority or the commercial trees. So we have to be very alert to this issue, that whatever we are doing, we are going to have a species-rich ecosystem on our landscape, so that we don't just end up with commercial trees that are exploited for business and then leaving our landscape not in a very good state. Then, of course, the issue of inadequate resources, because this is again a balance of restoration and business. So we have to be able to mobilize adequate resources so that we can be able to balance the two issues. And again, linked to the risk of creating monoculture is the issue of having a large number. As I said, we have over 3,000 members with diverse interests, and mainly the driving motive of quite a big number of them is the financial gain, as far as what they can be able to obtain from their farms. But again, harmonizing or bringing all those issues together for that big number of people is quite a tall order, but it's an issue that is can be addressed. Thank you very much for the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for providing that and also for sharing your slides with us. We'll ensure that they get distributed around. Colleagues, I'd like to now move on to a presentation on the Restoration Initiative. I think many of us in this webinar today are well aware of it. And this is a flagship initiative co-managed and co-led by a variety of organizations, in particular IUCN, UNEP, and FAO. And I'd like to hand it over to Carol St. Laurent to walk us through this and really tell us how TRI is engaging with and supporting smallholders, because we've had a number of questions, if you've seen in the Q&A, about how we take these practices, how we take these tools and really land them and dock them with people on the ground that need them. Over to you, Carol. Carol, just make sure you're unmuted as well. And if you could maximize your screen and go to presentation mode. Okay, Carol, we can see your presentation now. And please unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted now?
Perfect. There you go. We can hear you perfectly.
Sorry for that little glitch there. The presentation froze. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Toronto to everyone, wherever you are. What I will be speaking about is the Restoration Initiative, which is a Jeff-funded program, which we refer to as TREE. So you'll be hearing me refer to TREE instead of the full name. So I'm sorry, my presentation is freezing. Let's see if that'll work. I won't read my slides. You can get those later. Just to say that in a nutshell, TREE is about improving conditions for restoration. It's about getting some restoration and sustainable land management activities going on the ground, improving capacities, learning, partnership, and also improving access to public and private investments. And how does it come into this discussion? Well, one way is that TREE is applying a range of tools, but also that the TREE programmatic approach, a multi-country programmatic approach forged together, also is a tool in itself for building back better. Very briefly, it's a coalition of all sorts of partners at different levels, 3 implementing agencies led by IUCN, but also communities, practitioners, different levels of government and stakeholders, as well as a number of other technical partners. Very briefly, there's the map of where TREE operates. You can see that some of our challenges are great geographic distances. We have 3 languages regularly used in the program. Also some very different restoration objectives across countries. So that can be challenging, but it also creates some great opportunities for learning. For example, we had China say they wanted to learn from Guinea-Bissau, opposite ends of the map, about community engagement. Programmatic design, the glue that holds it all together is there's a common framework addressing barriers to restoration. There's a global support project that provides access to tools, adaptive management, for example. There are regional programmatic workshops, online learning that increase these opportunities for partnership and learning. And also things like harmonized monitoring and evaluation and delivery of tools together to capture efficiencies of scale. How does this all link into building back better? How does TREE contribute to building back better? Well, I'll highlight 4 specific things. First is the design of restoration interventions. So that is stakeholder-led, using best practice tools such as the Restoration Opportunities Assessment methodology. So the outcomes of these opportunities assessments are identified restoration interventions with quantified estimated benefits from those that match the needs of the ecosystems and the communities. And these processes get embedded early on in existing national and subnational decision-making processes for greater ownership and longer-term support. Number 2, investment in FLR and complementary value chains. TREE is supporting a number of such activities, including bamboo processing and manufacturing in Cameroon, pine nut processing in Pakistan, tree nurseries and community woodlots in a number of countries, for example, also ecotourism and other examples. Number 3, mobilizing funding. So all TREE projects have a dedicated component of work focused on mobilizing funding for forest landscape restoration. This includes things like feasibility assessments, examination of incentive schemes, the mentorship platform you just heard about from UN Environment. Number 4, enabling policy. So as we all know, changes in policy are some of the most durable outcomes on which restoration future work can take root. The ways that TREE works on policy include, for example, improving the policy framework that influences the management practices for the state farms in China, or establishing those are all important, as we know, working at the landscape level, all important cross-sectoral planning groups for forest landscape restoration. To learn more, there are some links. You will also be hearing more about one of these specific country projects in a few minutes from the incomparable Christophe Bézessier. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Carol, for that. And without further ado, let's hand it over to the incomparable Christophe Bézessier to tell us about the Restoration Initiative and the work going on in Central African Republic, CAR. Go over to you, Christophe.
Thank you, Thomas. Can you hear me well?
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay, so I will be brief. I will just present and jump on in the presentation from Carol to present a particular project, National Child Project, under this Restoration Initiative in Central African Republic, as you can see on this map. I can try to, as mentioned by Carol, the national project in Central African Republic is focused on forest landscape restoration with the idea to support landscape and livelihood resilience in Central African Republic in the southwest of the country. With the 4 components: enabling environment, with the idea to have policies, relevant policies ongoing and implemented in the country to promote forest landscape restoration interventions. A component with demonstration of forest landscape restoration approaches with a focus on provision of sustainable sources of incomes based on natural resources, including agroforestry options that are a very good and interesting forest and landscape restoration option. We have a component on upscaling restoration with the idea to support institution and to facilitate financial capacity building for scaling up. And the last one is on knowledge partnership monitoring evaluation. We have few indicators in the result matrix of this project. So, okay, somebody shared my screen. Excuse me, but my screen, okay. So, okay, I need to share again. I don't know what's happened. Okay.
Yeah, it seems to be working now, Christophe.
It's working. So the target is more than 3,000 hectares under restoration, including 1,000 hectares in the context of a public-private partnership on agroforestry with a Central Forest Initiative. I will present it in the next slide. We have a target of 22,000 hectares under improved sustainable forest management practices. An objective to have 3 million tons of carbon to be sequestered and or avoided emission, and 3,000 households that represent in Central African Republic around 20,000, 25,000 people. The initiative I want to focus on is an innovative public-private partnership in Central African Republic that we are initiating with 2 private companies, Alizé Construction and the Forest Resource Management, that are two companies, one French, one local company that are active in the country. They sign a public-private partnership agreement with the government in order to have field activities in a specific area that is around Bangui, the capital, in a watershed on the Boali River. That is an area where you have a potential for agroforestry. And with the TRI project that will support some activities in the context of this public-private partnership. The idea is to develop an agroforestry plantations in order to produce green charcoal and wood products coming from sustainably managed plantations and aiming at generating both incomes for local stakeholders and carbon benefits for the company. Central forest agroforestry plantation are based on an integrated approach for the development with the idea to really involve the local stakeholders around the city of Bangui and with the idea to generate income. So the initiative is expected to have a strong socioeconomic component with the idea to promote job creation, direct incomes for the population, and local production of food crops that will improve the food security in the targeted area, and that will help to build some generation of incomes for the population with the food crops associated to acacia trees and the acacia trees community plantations to be developed in the villages. So in a country with the COVID crisis is not the first crisis in this country and in this area, unfortunately for the southwest of Central African Republic. But this activity that is planned and was planned before the COVID crisis is particularly relevant in the post-COVID economic context because it will promote both job creation, income generation, and environmental benefits for the country and the local stakeholders. Over to you, Thomas.
Great, thank you so much, Christophe, for that and the detail on the work that's ongoing in CAR under the Restoration Initiative. Colleagues, we have about 6 or 7 minutes left. We need to finish at 5 minutes before the hour. We do have a few questions, and I'd like to get to as many of those as I possibly can. I've seen a couple of hands up. Please feel free to use that function as well. I'll come to those. Just very quickly, I'd like to hand it back to Jonathan from UNEP. Jonathan, how can individuals avail themselves of the mentoringship program that you talked about in your presentation very quickly?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, for the question. So we're at the stage where we're still developing the technological infrastructure for the mentoring platform to allow both project developers and the technical private sector experts to come together and basically emulate this mentorship through something practical. We envision having a first batch of applicants from the project side that will be comprised of TRI projects predominantly, but anyone interested at this stage to reach out to us and explore possibilities is most welcome to do that. On the expert side, we're actively looking for people who will be the mentors. So again, anyone interested in becoming a mentor, having certain skill set that you feel could be relevant and applicable to the restoration projects, most welcome to reach out to us.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. Keith Anderson, I think you had your hand up. We'll come to your question in just a moment. Ben, Marco, I'm wondering if you both talked about the tools that are being prepared and the guidelines. I'm wondering, very related question, how can individuals avail themselves of actual hands-on support, particularly in the context that we're in right now? Perhaps Marco first.
Yes, thank you. Excellent question. There was a similar question raised in terms of how to really kind of put these tools in the hands of those who need it, you know, the producer organizations. And my sense is that, well, of course, you can directly contact us and see what can be done. The other way is to work with through other programs that have like-minded ambitions and principles, like obviously the TRI initiative that was just mentioned today, or the Forest and Farm Facility, or many other initiatives that are out there that try to do this. I think this is the kind of work that we need to work collaboratively and in partnership.
Thanks so much for that, Marco. Ben, anything to add to that?
No, I agree with Marco. The guides are in development. You can reach out to us if you're interested in more, and the Forest and Farm Facility initiatives like TRI are the right vehicles to get this out into the hands of people who need them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'd like to hand the floor to Keith Anderson. Keith, you had your hand up. Please unmute yourself, and if you could be very brief with your question and direct to one of our panelists. Keith, are you still with us? Okay, I'm not hearing any response. We'll move on then. Tim, a question came up related to whether or not the pandemic is actually represents a fundamental shift in our restoration work, particularly, I think, in the context of the UN decade, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is it too early to tell at this stage?
Thanks, Tom. First of all, right now, many restoration projects have been delayed or on hold because of physical distancing requirements. But in the longer term, COVID-19 represents an opportunity for restoration because there is increasing evidence that habitat fragmentation and degradation can facilitate the spread of zoonotic diseases. We've seen also that in recovery measures, investing in ecosystem restoration in rural areas is very labor intensive, which is in this case a good thing. We want to create new jobs with economic stimulus. So as such, we also hope that restoration will be seen as one way to boost the economies and create long-lasting jobs with a new restoration economy in rural areas. But it depends on us, I mean, people like us on this call, whether or not we can build on that opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tim. Christophe, if I can hand it to you. We had a question that came in French. Could you just refer that question to participants and perhaps
it's a question on where. Yeah. Okay. The question is what stage we are in the implementation of the project in Central African Republic. So I will briefly answer. The project itself, the Restoration Initiative National Child Project, started 1 year ago, and we are in the implementation of the first year annual work plan this year. We are facing some delay, of course, due to the COVID crisis. For the public-private partnership itself, it has been approved in January to move forward with this partnership and to invest money from the JEF project on it during the last steering committee of the project in January 2020. We are in the final study to see how we will contribute, but the private companies have already started to implement it because with their own funds. And we are now discussing on how the public money will contribute to the initiative. But of course, we want to add value with public funds on the current initiatives and to make it more sustainable and positive for the local stakeholders. Over to you.
Thanks, Christophe. Thanks for that. There may be some follow-up questions as well. We've got a couple of more minutes. I'm going to hand it back to my colleague, Marco Boscolo. I'm having a slight technical problem. My screen has gone blank here, so I can't see if questions are coming in. Marco, are there any further questions in the 1 minute that we have remaining that we can address? Please keep in mind, colleagues, that we are monitoring the chat and Q&A, and there is follow-up, and please make sure you download the presentations that you have available to you in the link. Marco?
Thank you. Yes, I'm checking the chat box. I see many very useful comments being made, basically sharing that it is important to emphasize the engagement of local communities, small-scale producer and landowners, indigenous people. Somebody mentioning this approach in Pakistan to building back better, using the stimulus packages that was mentioned early on to not only help people with their jobs, but also promote restoration. So I don't see very much in terms of questions as much as sort of comments. Back to you, Tom.
Great. Thanks so much, Marco. Colleagues, I think we'll have to bring this session to a close. Thank you so much for having participated in this. Please stay on for the following session that's coming up in just a few minutes' time. I'd like to encourage everyone to please avail themselves of the link that's at the bottom of the chat function, the chat box at the bottom of your screen, to please include your email address so we can contact you. You can contact us as well, and we can ensure that this information circulates and gets out to you. On behalf of all of our participants and all of our colleagues who are panelists and presenters here today for this session, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. Excellent job.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tom.
Everyone.
Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much to Tom and all the others for the previous session. In a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes, we will start the next session. Just waiting the panel to be ready. And then we will look into the COVID implications for the forest private sector. See you all in 2 minutes. I would like to welcome everybody to the third session of the day, which is entitled The Global Forest Sector and COVID-19, Navigating a Sustainable Future in an Economically and Socially Constrained World. My name is Sven Walter. I'm Senior Forestry Officer at FAO, and I'm Secretary of the Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industries. And this webinar session is actually organized by the Advisory Committee and co-hosted by ITTO and FAO. The Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industry is a statutory body of FAO that guides us, FAO, on issues at stake for the sustainable consumption and production of forest products. It also provides a forum of dialogue between FAO and the private sector to identify strategic actions that promote sustainable forest-based management. We recently hosted a webinar looking at the impact of COVID on the forest sector with a selection of speakers with forestry interests from across the globe. We will share the link to the report in the chat. Today we will hear more perspectives from the private sectors and partners on both the impact of COVID-19 on the global forest sector, but also what development partners and members of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests, the CPF, such as FAO, ITTO, and the GEF, can do to contribute to efforts to building back better. Already the opening session of this webinar week on Monday highlighted the impact of COVID on the forest-based industries. You may remember that on the question which aspect of the forest sector are most likely to have been affected by the COVID pandemic, most responses indicated forest-based jobs. And also related to the measures proposed to be implemented to counteract the impact of COVID, again, most participants identified job creation as a key measure. So the forestry industry is at the forefront to address the impact of COVID and to contribute to building back better. Just some logistics. Kindly note that this event will be recorded. As you know, the recording and all presentations will be made available on the FAO website. Interpretation is available. You can choose your respective language. Also, hashtags are provided. We will share them again in the chat. And please also use the chat, continue to use the chat for your comments and questions. It's great to have as a moderator of the event with us Steve Johnson. Steve is the Director of Trade and Industry at the International Tropical Timber Organization, ITTO. And he will also introduce our excellent panel, which you already see on the screen. But before he takes over, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Carina Åkesson for a brief welcome. Carina is the Director General of the Swedish Forest Industries Association, and she is our chair of the FAO Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industries. I wish all of us an exciting webinar, and please, Carina, you have the floor.
No, I'm not muted. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sven. I'm really looking forward to this seminar as we have such a fantastic panelists, and we also have a huge audience. I really hope for many questions and remarks in the chat. But to start with, as we all recognize, the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting all parts of our lives across the world. And that is including food trade, food supply chains and markets, as well as people's lives and livelihoods. And ICSFI, we highlight that during this crisis, forest products have been critical on the front line, providing personal protective equipment and other supplies and services, including hygiene and sanitary products, biomass for energy, ethanol, respirator paper, and packaging for food and medical products. And in order to continue the uninterrupted supply of these products, the forest sector has been recognized in many parts of the world as an essential service. And there are many calls now from leaders across the globe, including the United Nations, governments, and the private sectors, of course, for COVID-19 recovery plans be green, sustainable, and climate smart. And we in ICSFI, we argue, and we are convinced that a sustainable forest sector lies at the heart of recovery plans that seek to build back better. Indeed, we think that there is now a unique chance to substitute fossil-based products with those from a renewable resource. With sustainable forest management, we can provide the world with a raw material that never ends. In ICSFI, we believe that strategic planning now is required to build back better by promoting the sustainable consumption and production of forest products. And those actions, they should include build back better together by pursuing a collaborative approach for all stakeholders concerned, including governments, civil society, academia, development partners such as FAO and the private sector. And by building back better together, we can reach coordination of shared initiatives and definitions of success. We can identify gaps and address deliverables. We should also build back better informed by promoting joint research efforts and actions to inform responsible supply and demand system, as well as strategic communication. Now I'm really looking forward to the contribution from today's diverse range of interesting speakers. So please, Steve Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Karina, and thanks for those opening words. Yeah, on behalf of ITTO, welcome to everybody that's out listening to this webinar. ITTO, on behalf of ITTO, we're very happy to be jointly co-hosting this part of the COVID week of FAO together with our colleagues Sven and Lyndall and the Committee on Sustainable Forest Industries that they told you about. ITTO has been in the business of promoting sustainable forest management in the tropics for a bit over 30 years. And certainly this is one of the biggest impacts that we've seen on the tropical sector during that period. While impacts have varied, it's clear that the tropical forest sector has been hard hit by COVID, with many mill and port closures, for example, and extremely sharp declines in demand from global markets. China's reported imports in the first quarter compared to last year were down 80% or more for tropical wood products, and I'm sure it's similar for non-tropical as well. So I think that we're looking at a hopefully once in a lifetime event here. It's clear that all of us are going to need to work together to rebuild the sector and build back better, as Karina said. We're lucky today or tonight, depending where you are, to have a distinguished panel of experts with us covering the 3 tropical regions that ITTO covers, who will give us their views and their many years of experience on how this crisis has impacted the forest sector in their region, the forest industries. And the panelists will each give their views, following which we'll have time for a brief discussion. And as Sven said, you can please submit any questions or comments using the chat function. After the discussion, Matthew Reddy of the Global Environmental Facility will close the webinar with some concluding thoughts. So since we have a full agenda, I want to turn to our first panelist, who is Francois van de Ven. Francois works for UFIGA, which stands for the Union des Forestiers et Industriels du Gabon. She's based in Libreville, but I believe she's sitting in Belgium right now because she's stranded there after a trip to Belgium and Gabon closed its borders due to COVID. So she's a direct casualty. Francois has been working in DRC before Gabon for many years and has a lot of experience in Central Africa. She's also on the board of directors of ATIBT, who many of you listening will know, the Association Technique Internationale des Bois Tropicaux, based in France, and also on the board of the Global Timber Forum. Francois, please take the floor and give us your views on this pandemic.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all the people that are signed in and listening with us. I wish to thank the organizers to give me the opportunity to be a panelist for this session, as the issue is rather important. I don't need to present myself anymore because Steve already did, so that is already 1 minute saved. Thank you, Steve. My presentation will turn about 3 topics: the impact of the COVID crisis in the Congo Basin, the impact in Gabon, and short, medium, and long-term approach by private sector and stakeholders. I did a little grid just to give you an idea, because there is one difference in particular. In the borders are closed everywhere. The forest sector is an activity, more or less. I said yes because they are active, but the activity is really reduced. In DRC, there seems to be more than a problem, and it is really like to neglect. It's really very small. Exports everywhere decreased. Technical leave and or dismissal everywhere has it been the case. As you can see, for us, it's one sentence that says there will be a before and after COVID. And I think it's really necessary to think about the after COVID. So what are the main problems that are around in the different countries of the Congo Basin? Everywhere there's a problem with transport. Has to do with zones that are blocked, that are not, you can't reach, has to do also with passes that has to be delivered and which are not delivered on time. So transport is a huge problem because we cannot also have spare parts going to the forest sites, and so it's really very problematic. Logistics in total with the port, I will come back on this later on, but it's the same in everywhere in every country. Custom agents which are not always available, agents of the administration which are not always available for various reasons, and blockages, changes of instructions, always in order to protect, of course, and prevent the people working there, but sometimes taking so drastically that you don't have time to switch and to adapt. There has also been these measures which had to be put in place for forest companies. It's not only their factories, but it's the forest sites, it's the life bases, it's where their workers live with their family. So you can have a few thousand people that you have to put in place measures to protect them and to organize the in and out going of these life bases and these factories. And there was a lack of protection and prevention material, and what was available was sold at a very high price. So this is really not very, very interesting. And as I said, minimum service of forest administration, of customs, it has been held to try to work, but in Gabon, the private sector of the forest sector is the biggest employer, private sector employer. So we really had to work hard to stay on the field. Difficulties, again, logistics. In Gabon, there was a total containment after 15 days, and afterwards we returned to a partial containment, but with strong reminder of the protection and the prevention barriers. Concerning exports, there were lack of empty containers as less material was coming in. and ships were canceling also their calls. So that also was very problematic to handle for the companies, as they had extra costs with the containers already being in the port and not being able to ship. Some containers from Gabon were shipped via Pointe Noire, so to get on another boat. But that again, that brings delays and extra delays for the customers. The timber industry has said they had to ensure all these adoption of the barrier measures for their employees and also assist local administrations who demanded to be helped out and local NGOs. So now with all this, they asked, you know, the title short, medium and long term. I couldn't get to the point what was short, what was medium, what was long term. So because I think every approach is urgent right now, is important and most of all needed. So I just put it like this and we'll see how we go further on. I was like the professional associations like UFIGA and companies need to have the continued support for the sustainable forest management plans. In Gabon, we are now arriving at the second rotation, and we found that the legislation for the second rotation is not ready. And we need to have that at the short term because you cannot wait till the day before the last year is gone. So there's a lot of work to be done and experience to be asked for. How do we continue? How does the second rotation go any further? Then there is one point, we have a lot of projects also and a lot of stakeholders who want to help us. But the problem is we are submerged by demands of kind of reports. Every stakeholder has his own type of report, his periodicity, and it takes, you know, a long time to get a quarterly report validated. And by the time it is validated or amended, you're already at your next report. And it goes on like this. And all these projects, we don't foresee somebody to pay, somebody to do all these reports. So it's actually also the people on the field who are a lot of time doing the reports. So for me, it's like, it's not effective because the idea is that as much as money from the project goes to have result on the field. So the effectiveness of the project is, for me, is prejudiced by that. So we need to go back to what must be in a report. We can write a book every report, but the essential is that the stakeholder knows what has been done with the money and what are the results. So to write every time how great the forest is, it is great, it's super great, but it doesn't need to be repeated in reports. Maintain continued support and assistance to coach companies towards sustainable forest certification, especially the countries that don't have flagged or have not yet put in place flag. The best thing right now to do is to go towards certification, especially with this pandemic. Once more, it has been stated that, you know, the forest is so important in each and every aspect. It contributes to our health, and it must be exploited in a way that it's economically viable, socially engaged, and respect the environment. So that is really, these points I think are on the lips of everyone today. So the certification does that, but we need to have continuous support because it's costly for the companies, and it's also very costly in formation and training and everything. As I said, it is costly, and the customer in Europe is not always aware of the price. So sometimes timber, tropical timber is not sold due to the price. But on the other hand, if people only would know, the customers only would know what exactly the impact is of a certified company on the field, I think they would think twice. And maybe it's the time now to use the opportunity to promote more and more this sustainable and certified timber. It's also important because we need to continue to work to avoid more economic refugees. This is very important. We are in Gabon, we have a big large number of employees. If we have to reduce our activities, it will become very problematic for a lot of people. And then we have these certification schemes where you can actually see the due diligence, you can see the certification, you can see you can actually see it all together. It comes together, and the idea is to have certified and legally harvested timber in respect of all the conditions by law, whether it be towards the communities, the workers, the forest, the environment, everything. So I think there should, instead of all walking the same path, but not together, I think it's part-time we go together and we see how we can work and try to advance. You see all these negotiations of FLEGT, which are not being put in place because it's way too difficult to put in place. Why not start by a system that goes step by step, but where every time we get more and more advanced in the interest of all. In Gabon, I speak particularly for Gabon, we have a lot of problems with the wood waste because we are working in the interior. Gabon is a very small country in that respect with only 2.2 million inhabitants, and most of them live in cities where they can access electricity or gas to cook. They don't need timber to cook. So there's a lot of waste in the interior, which we just, we cannot do anything with it about besides burning it. And some of the companies have this they work for cogeneration, but not all, because it's also very costly and it's also very special. So for me, it's bizarre that with all this climate change, that with this waste, we cannot do anything. There are countries around Gabon which don't have forests and which need fuel wood to cook. Why can't we, with just, money added, of course, because the price is low, but why can't we find a solution there? Also, all the projects, they continuously, they ask us, you should think about projects with climate change SDGs. I'm like, companies don't have time to write or to try to do projections of models or blueprints for what can a project be doing. But what they can do, if we only have a few blueprints, we can say, oh, we have this. And then it looks like, a prefab house, but you can customize upon the size and the area where you are. So if we could have blueprints for projects which are already in general accepted, it would be way easier for companies to go ahead with projects in climate change and SDGs. And in a complementary way, as I said, a better integration into the sustainable wood for sustainable world. I think we need to be more implicated, especially with what happened with the COVID crisis. And we are working, for instance, with ATRBT on this umbrella brand Fair and Precious, which is also a promotion for certification and also for, of course, legally and environmentally logged timber. So that for me are the most lines which I would think about. I hope I didn't pass my 10 minutes. So I wish to thank all of you for listening, and I hope I've been able to put through some ideas. Thank you.
And thank you, Francois. Very stimulating presentation, and certainly I think all of us can sympathize, especially with the issue of too many reports on the projects. I think ITTO and FAO might be responsible for demanding some of that, but it's certainly good points there. Just want to remind listeners, please put your comments and questions in. We're reviewing them, and we'll try and have some time for discussion after the speakers. Our next speaker is from Latin America. He is Ivan Tomaselli. Ivan is the founder and president of STCP, one of the largest consulting companies in general. Started focusing on forestry, but now has expanded several other areas. He has over 40 years of experience in developing projects related to the forest industry and forest product markets, public policy, and sectoral programs. Ivan has worked on projects and assignments for many international organizations, including FAO, ITTO, the World Bank, IDB and many others. He's got a lot of experience, a lot of publications, and we're looking forward to hearing his perspectives on the situation in Latin America. Ivan, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Steve, and thanks to FIO for the invitation to participate in this seminar. I hope I can bring you some news because everyone in the world is talking about COVID. Well, we'll try to summarize in 10 minutes what is the impact in Latin America and what's the recovery perspectives for the forest sector. Just as a very short introduction, we know that the COVID-19 created a global health, economic, environmental, and social crisis. And there are several impacts, global economy downturn, reduction of consumption and price of commodities and energy, etc., etc. We don't need to go into detail on that. In Latin America has been seriously affected. Just to give you some numbers, 20% of the global cases are in Latin America. Brazil has over 1 million cases and more than 50,000 deaths. Peru and Chile has 250,000 cases, and Mexico, Ecuador, Colombia, and others also have high numbers. So it's a serious crisis in Latin America. Well, governments have imposed restrictions, to mitigate the impact on the health and the economy. Several measures were started, such as long lockdowns, social distances, and this all impacted the costs, production and logistics. Most countries of the region have considered the forest sector as an essential sector, so the sector had the opportunity to continue to work. Brazil had short restrictions to operate imposed by some local governments, but quite short, 1 week or 2 weeks. But in January, the forest sector was operating. Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, and some other countries had more severe restrictions. Well, the main impact comes from the national and international market, But in fact, what we have noticed, I have been involved in several discussions, regional discussions and national discussions, and the impact of markets is still remain to be fully assessed. It varies among countries, among regions, among the industry, among products. In Latin America, for instance, the 70% of the plywood production is exported, and 70% or more of the pulp production is exported. So international consumption plays an important role. Some countries are largely dependent on exports, like Uruguay. 90% of the production of Uruguay is basically exported, And most of the countries, they have a concentration in international markets. Some have exported 50 or 60% of their exports to US or China or some European countries. Well, along the last 3 or 4 months, the consumption was reduced and local consumption was reduced, and generally exports were maintained during the first 3 months of the year. But international prices of solid wood products started to decline in April or May, and now are something like 20 or 30% lower than they were before the crisis. So what are the mitigation measures? Well, besides increasing investment in national health structure, including the support to local and state governments on health programs, most governments of the region implemented actions to mitigate economic and social impact. I'm saying most because some of them have no real clear program of supporting population and business. Brazil, to give you an indication, has a flexible working relationship. There are some financial support to unemployed persons. We have increased the availability of financial resources and facilitation to credit access to maintain companies in operation, postponing of tax payments, renegotiation of private and state government loans, etc. There are a list of measures implemented in Brazil and some other countries of the region. Well, but there are some questions we still, as I had mentioned to you, I have been involved in several discussions. I have published some paper on that. But to me also, we have some questions that are not very clear. What means a return to normal? We still don't know that. Well, when it will happen? It might take another 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. You know, how national and international market will be impacted? You know, it's just a short-term impact, or we are going to have a change in consumption and in the consumer's strategy or behavior. What will be the overall economic, social, and environmental impact? We need to assess that. We need to have information. Governments support the people and the companies, and it will work to mitigate the impact on social and economic side of the equation. What about consumers' confidence and behaviors? How will it be changed, and how long it will change take to come back to a new normal? How fiscal deficit will affect countries and the strategy of development of the countries of the region. So these are questions that we are not clear to us. Some contribution of the forest sector to the recovery. The impact of the forest sector and the capacity to recover will still need to be assessed also. We don't know how strong is the impact, and we don't know how can we collaborate to develop to recovery to the new situation. Impact in the pulp and paper industry in principle is very small, but a reduction in production and prices of food products, solid wood products, has been around 20 to 40% and is expected to remain like that along 2020. Small and medium-sized operations, the largest portion of the forest industry in the region, will be more affected. They have less credit, they have less resources to survive through the crisis. The new normal will depend on global economy recovery. Market recovery basically is the equation, the solution of the equation. And it will take some time, you know. Perhaps it will take 2 years or even more. Impact will be stronger on exporting companies that are concentrating the market in the US and Europe. And finally, one important point, international organizations can play an important role on the recovery strategy. Just to mention something about the international organizations, I had some discussions also with some groups in Brazil and regional with Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile. And the first and short-term contribution of international organization can be to provide detailed and consistent global information to facilitate assessment of the economic and social and environmental impact, to align actions and define a strategy to promote the recovery. If you have no information, you cannot do that. Support the implementation of the recovery strategy to promote sustainable development. So this is something that international organizations can work to provide a consistent and global information. I don't think we have that for the forest sector. We have information on what's happening here and there, but we don't have a detailed and consistent global information. On medium and long term, strengthening international cooperation based on shared initiatives, including mainly the private sector, to develop competitive develop competitive processing, you know, to facilitate trade, enhance investment, and promote sustainable consumption. Well, the expected economic and environmental impact, what are the changes? The impact and the global recovery will depend on the availability and capacity of countries to preserve fiscal balance, you know, and adopt monetary and financial measures to support families and business for at least the next 12 months, or it might be longer. So the support, most of the countries in the regions have
programs that last for 90 days or 120 days, but it has to be extended, and has to be strategically developed. In short, full economic recovery of the forest sector will depend on the domestic and international market. And this is going to take some time, perhaps 2 years, as I mentioned. Global and country economic, social, and environmental impact perspective remains to be assessed. We still don't know really what's going to be the global impact on countries and the global impact on the forest sector, on the economic, social, and environmental perspective. The region forest sector will depend largely on the global economic recovery. Well, thank you very much. I hope I had made some contribution. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ivan. Very good and stimulating discussion presentation. Certainly the point that the recovery is going to take longer than the currently planned stimulus packages in a lot of countries is an important point, and one that we have to bear in mind, as is the need for information. Certainly ITTO is well aware of that, and we're doing what we can on the tropical front, but you're right that there's a lot more to do. I'd like to turn now to our final speaker on the panel. We have with us from Malaysia, Ms. Annie Ting, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Sarawak Timber Association. Those of you who know Malaysia know that Sarawak is one of the big timber producing states in that country. Annie's been serving in the STA for over 30 years. And her organization represents 360 companies in Malaysia, in Sarawak, and it's involved in both upstream and downstream activities in the forestry and timber industry, as well as the subsequent trade. She's been involved in many international initiatives, including attending ITTO meetings and APEC meetings, and she's built up a wealth of experience over the years in her various roles at the Sarawak Timber Association. So we look forward to hearing Annie. Please go ahead, Annie.
Thank you, Steve, for your kind introduction. First, I would like to thank FAO for inviting me to speak in this session. Over the year, tropical forest countries in the ASEAN region have made significant progress to implement SFM toward achieving Sustainable Development Goals prior to COVID-19. Cost is a huge challenge in sustaining this effort, and this challenge is further magnified by COVID-19. My presentation will briefly touch on industrial perspective, on Malaysia's efforts to sustainably manage tropical forests and its threat post-COVID-19. This is my presentation outline. I want to introduce my association, where Steve have very well introduced. Malaysia has 3 forestry regions: Peninsula, Sabah, and Sarawak, with a total land area of 33 million hectares. Forest cover is 55% of the total land area. In 2015, Malaysia commit to maintain over 50% of its natural forest cover by the year 2030. This goal is to be sustained and achieved through the implementation of SFM in line with Sustainable Development Goal. Malaysia has its own certification scheme endorsed by PUSC. Over the year, this effort is in the progress, and as of June 2020, the total forest area of 4.6 million hectares have been certified. Effort towards achieving SFM in Malaysia, i.e. in Peninsula Malaysia, are undertaken by the Forestry Agency, whereas in Sabah and Sarawak, efforts are and its associated costs are taken out by the industry. Prior to the COVID-19, cost of managing tropical forests is already very high, mainly due to concessions are normally located in the interior part and poor road connectivity. François actually have highlighted very well on the situation in the tropical forest operation, as well as Ivan. Infrastructure and facilities such as road access are built and maintained by the timber company. Also, there are many communities to engage with, and also wide range of biodiversity to manage. I share the same sentiment with François on the SFM. Is more and more demanding, and costs are rising, and this does not reflect in the price. As you all know, that it is well-known fact that management of tropical forests involves much higher costs than temperate forests. For example, there is no aesthetic difference between a chair made from SFM, tropical timber, and a chair made from non-SFM tropical timber. However, both chairs differ significant in price. Normally, you and me, we will definitely purchase the cheaper chair, i.e. non-SFM tropical timber. Hence, it is important to address the price mismatch urgently in order for SFM implementer to be able to continue the effort to achieve SDG by the year 2030. This already challenging situation is further worsened by the COVID-19 due to partial and full lockdown in Malaysia and also most part of the world. Again, François and Ivan have highlighted their region situation. There is a drop in demand for timber as activities such as construction has slowed down or stopped. Social distancing has led to a decline in production and at the same time increased the overheads, resulting in increased the unit cost. However, it is still too early to quantify fully the effect of COVID, and we believe that the impact will become more obvious in third and fourth quarter of this year. Some countries have shown signs of second wave, and full future lockdown will further intensify the damage already inflicted on the global economy and market. It is uncertain when this pandemic will end and whether business can recover. Cash flow crises have made it very challenging for the businesses to stay afloat and maintain full employment, as well as for SFM implementer to continue the effort to implement SFM. In response to the objective of this session and the Forestry Week, I seek FAO and development partners to provide an immediate sustainable financial support to be channeled directly to the private sector to cushion the impact of COVID-19 so that the livelihood of forest-dependent people will not be affected, as well as to enable us to continue our effort to implement SFM and achieve SDG by the year 2030. I would also like to call for more efforts to be carried out to improve the world recognition of SFM tropical timber. I believe you all will agree with me. Timber is more environmental friendly renewable resources when compared to substitutes such as steel and plastic. The industry could also greatly benefit if governments around the world are committed to utilize SFM tropical timber in their procurement policy. This will not only prevent the industry from experiencing a collapse in demand and production, but also guarantee a sustainable demand for SFM tropical timber. Again, as I have highlighted in my presentation, there is a price mismatch between cost and market present value of SFM tropical timber. I hope that green pricings can match the higher production costs. In order for all stakeholders to move forward in one direction, dialogue educational programs to discuss global strategies such as nature-based solution, circular bioeconomy, and any new strategy introduced now and then would be necessary to minimize gaps in understanding. Lastly, I seek FAO, ITTO, and other development partners' intervention to bridge the gap so that tropical timber producers can remain resilient and keep the forest intact. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Annie. That was great. Certainly the issue about recognizing SFM timber as environmentally friendly is something that all of us know is important and have been working towards. And I think Francois made a reference to the Sustainable Wood for a Sustainable World initiative that is being pushed forward by a number of the CPF partners, including FAO and ITTO. And just a bit of a plug that tomorrow afternoon, Rome time, there's another webinar on that exact topic. So I'm sure some of us will be tuning into that. So again, thank you to all three panelists. Excellent presentations. All the presentations will be available on FAO's website after this COVID week. At this stage, I didn't see too much coming into the chat, but I'm gonna open the questions. I have one question in the question and answer box addressed to Karina, who opened the session. And that is, what do your company and your constituent ACSFI members see as fundamental change in the industry's operating environment as a result of the global pandemic shockwave? Karina, are you there and are you ready?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here. I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I am unmuted. Okay, yes, I'm here. I think that we will see in the investigations that is now been doing in FAO that the different industry, the forest industry in the different countries, and especially producing different products, have been affected in different ways. I mean, for example, the forest industry in Sweden, we have been producing as normal in generally, but depending on what product and what market you are on, you have had different effects. And I know, and I'm sure of that, you will see the same thing around the globe. But maybe it's so that one of the main effects is what I said in the beginning of this seminar, that it has been so obvious that so many of our products are essential. I mean, it has been appointed in many countries as essential products. And I think that has been an eye-opener for many of us. I think now you are on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm trying to read questions and moderate at the same time here. So thank you very much for that answer. And I forgot to mention that question was from Andrei Kushlin. And I saw another question which was there and then disappeared from Ed Pepke, who I know and some of you may know also, but I'm going to read that question anyway, because I think it's a bit related to the certification issue. And Ed's question, which I guess is to Gabon and Malaysia, is the COVID crisis impacting progress or or in any way towards flag tea negotiations that may be going on in those countries. Now, I'm not sure what the status of flag tea is in Malaysia, but Francois may know about Gabon. Maybe I will give Francois the floor first. Francois, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. Well, the negotiations in Gabon have been on standstill for a few years already. But interesting is that the actual minister contacted the EU, wrote to the EU, asking to restart negotiations. So I think what is actually, I have one study which is being done by a consultant to see at what stage we were left and what is the way forward now, what is the road plan, the road map which we have to present. So we are working on this and hopefully we can start back again the negotiations.
Thanks, Francois. Annie, do you want to take a shot on what or what isn't happening in Malaysia?
Okay, I won't be able to answer for Malaysia. However, I can answer for Sarawak. As far as Sarawak concerned, we are still in phase approach. That means we are still observing the process. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Annie. I don't have any other questions coming in from the listeners. Maybe I will give one to Yvonne because he didn't answer any question yet, and I like to put him on the spot. But anyway, Yvonne, you mentioned that SMEs are going to be more impacted, small and medium enterprises, which of course makes sense. Any ideas what we can do to mitigate that? I mean, how can we help out these SMEs? I mean, I'm sure part of it is stimulus packages and money, but are there other things we can be thinking about?
Well, to just give an indication, perhaps we have something like 10,000 or 15,000 small companies in Latin America altogether. Can you listen me? Yes? Okay. Well, I think it's first in the next 6 months or 12 months or even a bit longer, local governments have to provide the support to maintain the business as the main problem has not been the financial support, but the access to the credits. You know, there is no guarantees, and banks and other lending organizations are afraid of losing money. So it's a kind of I think it's, first of all, we have to assess the impact. We don't know how strongly the impact over the group of companies, large companies, small companies, medium companies, pulp and paper sector, solid wood sector, and other sectors. So a clear assessment of the impacts and the alternatives is something that the international organizations can do, but it has to be done very quickly. You know, it's something that has to be done in the next 2 or 3 months. It's not consulting work that can last for 12 months or a year. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yvonne. Well, we are coming up to about 5 minutes left in our hour. I've been told that our interpretation stops fairly smartly after the end of the hour, so I'm probably going to cut it fairly soon. I think the issue of support to industries, etc., is something that primarily is going to have to be handled at the national level, but certainly we in ITTO, and I think our colleagues in FAO and also other development partners are going to be looking at this very carefully, because without a healthy and vibrant forest sector, I think we all agree that it's hard to keep the forest standing. We need to keep value on the forest. Yeah. So having said that little summary on my part, I think I'm going to turn over the floor to my colleague Matt Reddy from the GEF. Matt's a senior private sector specialist, and he's going to help us to wrap up our session today with some concluding thoughts and comments. Matt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks to all of our speakers today. You know, the introduction from Karina, the insights that we heard from all over the world, very representative, I would say. Congratulations to Lyndall and Sven for building such a representative panel today with Françoise, Ivan, and Annie. I'd like to also share a little bit of the Jeff perspective. I think this is important. For the Jeff, COVID-19 is at its core a product of our environmental crisis. And so in a nutshell, COVID-19 emerges through this collision of human and natural systems. And tomorrow, you will hear from my boss, Gustavo Fonseca, our Director of Programs at the Jeff, about our work to address the actual drivers and causes of these pandemics, whether it be COVID or Ebola or HIV indeed. And so that'll be tomorrow. A quick plug there for Gustavo. And suffice to say that there'll be a white paper coming from the Jeff on this particular issue. Clearly, the Jeff has a number of programs that you're most likely familiar with. I will point out many of these which aim to protect natural ecosystems whilst at the same time providing for resilient landscapes. We're very proud to work with FAO, especially on the Dryland Sustainable Landscapes project, and you heard from Tom Hammond this morning on that particular piece of work, and also across our work in the Congo Basin, in the Amazon, and our FOLUR, Food Land Use and Restoration project, which really does address some of the drivers of deforestation and environmental degradation. I think when we listen to the presentations today, you know, Karina pointed out, it was emphasized also by Françoise and Ivan, that the effects of the COVID-19 are felt so asymmetrically across the globe. There is no one way of looking at the way that markets are affected. You know, it can be from a country perspective, from an SME or a global player. And I think we should be prepared to take into account the cascading implications of this reality as they affect global supply chains. And I think that's the key role of the private sector in this, is to keep the supply chains going, because as Karina said, this is an essential service, and things don't go too well when essential services are not provided. And you know, consumers need to be able to have trust in the supply chains that we have, and to make sure, as we mentioned from Annie and Ivan, the role of certification to make sure that consumers understand that their forest products are being sustainably produced. Research just this month in April from Stanford University showed that buffer zones around biodiversity rich forests can dramatically lessen the likelihood of human and nature impacts, that collision that I mentioned. We heard from the May 27th ACSFI meeting, Mike May from Susano. We also heard David Brand, great exponents of integrating these kinds of considerations and buffers into landscapes through their companies, and in general the work of NGP. April's work in Riau on Sumatra, and Mondi's leading work in South Africa with the Isi Mangaliso World Heritage area, and Annie's reference also to the commitment of Malaysia to maintain 50% forest cover. All of these measures are going to have huge implications. One thing that did come up, it came up earlier this morning with Daphne Hewitt as well, is that science and data and information, Ivan, you also mentioned it, and the role of international organisations like FAO in providing this kind of data. If we're going to build back better, we must build back better informed. And I think that's a critical point. And the work of FAO-STAT, the Global Forest Resources Assessment, all of the work that you do, and I'll congratulate Sven and Lyndall again on their work, is crucial in providing that kind of information. So we need a collective effort. We're pursuing the same goals. Many organisations are pursuing the same goals of human and nature sustainability, but no one of us individually has this capacity to effect systemic change. And so it's crucial that the private and the public sectors work together with partners such as FAO, of course, and the GEF to drive this global collective action. So great that we've been able to have this session today, and we look forward at the GEF to working with you as part of this drive. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Matt, for those inspiring words. And by my computer clock, it's exactly 10 p.m. here in Japan, which means it's exactly 3 p.m. in Rome. And I don't know what time it is where everybody is listening from, but I think it's time for us to finish. So on behalf of both FAO and ITTO, I want to thank, first of all, our excellent speakers, Karina, Francois, Yvonne, Annie, and Matt at the end. On my part, I want to thank Sven and Lyndall from FAO. I know Lyndall a long time, Sven not so long, but good to make new contacts even at this late stage in my career. Finally, I want to thank everybody who tuned in and just remind you to take a look at FAO's website. All the presentations of all the webinars throughout the whole week are going to be there. Probably we will put the presentations from the 3 panelists today on ITTO's website as well, for those of you that want to look at ITTO's website. So everyone stay safe, and thank you for your participation in this webinar.
And thank you, Steve, for excellent moderating. Thank you, Steve.
Cheers.
Thank you very
Stay
much.
safe, everybody.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.